In a recent video, I showed you guys a really simple technique that you can use to build modular garden frames just like this one, in fact, this exact one, to customize your garden in all kinds of ways for exactly what you need. And we've seen that time and time again from members of the community. And today I wanted to follow up to that video and show you guys a bunch of little accessories and simple things you can do to accessorize your garden frames once you have them built. And a really simple way to start is if you're doing some trellising, you can just kind of utilize the framework of the build for trellising. And we've seen people do this a bunch with all kinds of things really simply. We see people do it with trellis string. They just simply tie it onto the crossbar. This goes all the way down and then they tie it off to their plants and you've got some trellising. We've also seen people use some big cattle panels or some chicken wire to trellis, and you can add that to your frame. We'll talk about that in a second. But you can simply add some trellis netting. And of course, as we talked about in that video, you can add some crossbars using some T-connectors. Just add these across, and if you want to trellis certain areas and add some crossbars, you can do that really easily to then add trellis netting off of those and then trellis your plants to give them some support that they need. So that's a really simple thing you can do for trellising, and like I said, we'll talk about some other like cattle panels and things in the future. But another common thing we see people do is frost protection. So they'll get some plastic and add this to the frame. I've just got a small piece here just to kind of show you guys. But essentially we see people add this to their frame, and we've seen some really creative solutions like some wiggle wire that we saw in an interview with Mickey a while back. You can check that out, I'll link it down below, which is more complex, a little bit more expensive, but works really well. What we like to do are use what we call the conduit cover clips, and we have these on our website. And these are essentially just plastic clips like this that are just made to snap over a material and then snap onto the EMT conduit. So if you're adding frost protection, you can simply get the plastic that you need for the area that you live in and the type of protection that you're trying to use. And then you essentially just use these conduit cover clips and just snap them onto the frame directly over the plastic, and it holds them in place, and it's really easy to just kind of snap those on and add those in place there. And these same cover clips work well for materials like if you've got sunshade that you want to add to your garden frame, or even if you're building a canopy for your house and you drape this over the framework, as you can see there. And if you have a material with grommets, we'll talk about that in a second, but like this material that I have here doesn't have grommets, but you can do the same kind of thing. You can just use these conduit cover clips, snap them over the material really easily just like that, and you can secure the sunshade, and it's nice and simple, pretty inexpensive, and you can add some sun protection to your frame really easily. So that's how you can do those things with the conduit cover clips. And if you've got a material with grommets, let's say you've got a fancy tarp from Harbor Freight that you want to secure to your frame, you can see here that this has grommets. And there's a couple different ways that you can do this that we like and we've talked about before, where essentially you can build out your frame and kind of make it where the material sits, maybe an inch or two from the framework, and then you've got a ton of different possibilities. Nice and easy. You can add a zip tie to it and secure that in place. You can use plastic, or if you want something a little beefier, then you can use the metal zip ties that we've talked about on the channel before. These are a little bit more expensive because they require a special tool to put them in place, but of course they're going to be stronger and last longer if you're using them outside in a garden project. But a really easy one that we like to use that's pretty modular and you can kind of swap out all the time is two different types of bungees. So essentially you've got the ball bungee here that you can use, and those go around the frame and then they pull tight. And this is one you kind of have to, you can actually get these based on the length that you want them to be from your frame, but essentially you just pull them tight and then they pull tight to the frame, and that's how they latch there. That's something to keep in mind, the distance that between the frame and the tarp. But we also talked about these a while back, which is a similar thing where it's just the bungee that you can put through the grommet. And then you've got the hook, and you can just hook those back around. Or you can even put this around the conduit before you put the connectors on, and then actually hook onto your frame or hook onto your tarp or whatever it may be with the grommet, which would be pretty cool too. But that's really nice and simple. And another one that we've seen a bunch, kind of similar to the conduit cover clips, are these gadget clips, which we also have on the website. And these are kind of similar, except they're a little bit easier to put on because they have this, similar to the binder clips that you've probably seen before. And these just go over top of the material like that. And these work well for like lighter duty applications where you might want to remove stuff, quickly and at different times, but they're really easy to use where you just kind of open them, drop them on there, and then you can take them off really easily. So those are really cool. And let's see what else we've got here. Okay, if you're doing a garden enclosure, to protect your garden from critters coming in, you might want to add a gate to your garden. And we've seen a couple different ways that you can do this. These are hinges made for PVC, and they just snap on. They're made to snap onto PVC, but we've also learned that you can add them to EMT conduit, but you can see they're very loose, but that's okay because there's a pre-drilled hole, and you can add self-drilling screws, and then you can add hinges to your garden and add a gate really easily. And these work well. These are aluminum, so these last pretty well outside. What's really cool is we also had a community member named Billy, and if you've been on the channel before, you've probably seen us talk about these. These are hinges that he made specifically for EMT conduit. They work very similar to these aluminum ones, except they're just 3D printed, and they have the hinge pin in the middle with a bolt and nut that's really simple. And these are made specifically for 3/4 inch EMT, and they just go on here. And these are a little bit more challenging to install because you have to drill all the way through the conduit, but I think they're stronger in the way they attach because that bolt is going all the way through the conduit and securing that way. And then you can just build and add your gate on there. And then once you do that, you're going to need a way to latch that gate because you want to still be able to get inside and open and close it. And Billy also designed this conduit gate latch that he 3D printed. And you can check out the videos, overviews that we've done on these to kind of see exactly how these go together. But essentially, it's just these pieces that make up the gate latch. And you put this in here, and you can see that there's a latch there. So when the bolt goes in there and closes down and latches, and then you just slide this open, and that will open the gate. But you can add a gate latch really easily, and that's a really good accessory to do that. And the last couple of things I want to show you guys are just ways you can attach the frame. We kind of mentioned this briefly in that other video, but you can attach flat surfaces or conduit to flat surfaces with these. These work really well if you've got a wooden garden bed at the base. You want to secure your conduit verticals. Make sure the frame is nice and rigid. You just snap these onto EMT conduit, add a screw through into the wood of your garden bed, and then similarly you can use these conduit hanger straps, which have this bolt here that you can take out, and then this clamp goes around the EMT conduit, and you put this bolt back in, and then once you secure and tighten this down, you have this piece here, and we've seen people attach this to their garden beds as well. But that's a really simple way to secure your garden bed to the conduit structures that you're building, or vice versa. And then the last thing I wanted to tell you guys about was adding like cattle panels and chicken wire, things like that to your frame. Kind of similarly to these materials, you can do that and enclose your whole material with that metal stuff and secure your garden plants. And really we've seen a few different ways that people do that. I like to use the metal zip ties that we mentioned earlier. Works really well. You just put that through the material and then use that special tool like we've talked about in the past. And then you can secure the enclosure material with this. And this will keep it strong and secured. We've also seen people use metal wire, which I think works pretty well, but honestly, these metal zip ties I think are the way to go. But that's pretty much it. That's a lot of simple hacks you can do to accessorize this garden frame. Hope you guys enjoyed it and found these useful, and you can incorporate them into your garden. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.